Welcome to the ABOP podcast. ABOP is the Alliance of Black Orchestral Percussionists, a nonprofit organization that focuses on mentoring future generations of Black percussionists. My name is Raynor Carroll. I am an ABOP founder. Thank you for joining me. This episode, Tales from the Orchestra's Rear, features stories that take place in the daily happenings of a symphony orchestra from the perspective of the percussionists. Joining me in sharing our tales are Douglas Cardwell, former timpanist with the New Mexico Philharmonic, and Michael Crusoe, former timpanist with the Seattle Symphony. Both are ABOP founders. Mike and Douglas, welcome back to the ABOP podcast.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Good to see you guys.
So in our typical setup within an orchestra, we have a unique perspective, I feel, from the rear of the orchestra. Our sight lines are great. We can see the conductor, although I guess sometimes we don't necessarily want to. We can see our colleagues, the audience, and we typically have more time for observation because we are not playing as much as our colleagues. Would you guys agree?
Agreed.
Absolutely, yes.
So we have Tales from the Orchestra's Rear. Let me start with one. And I think this might be something that we have all experienced with modern technology and the coming of the cell phone. I remember a performance we did at Walt Disney Concert Hall, and there was a relatively quiet passage, and the cell phone went off. And Esapeka was conducting, and usually it stops, but it kept going. I mean, it kept going for a while, maybe 30 seconds. Esapeka got frustrated. He turned around and said, "Rip the battery out,"
Whoa.
Yes. And then he turned back around. He just kept on conducting. So, I'm sure we've all had experiences when cell phone or before the cell phone, the beepers went off or whatever. So that was an experience that I think the audience enjoyed too. So.
Yeah.
The last time I can actually remember something like that happening, he and I laughed about it before his passing. The great cellist, Lynn Harrell, we were doing Don Quixote, I believe it was, and it got down to the very those final moments when it was really quiet. And Lynn's cell phone went off, and he frantically started reaching in his pocket to turn it off. I mean, it was the most inopportune moment that it could have happened, And
I've never experienced that where the soloist cell phone goes off. Wow.
Yeah, it happened to me once. I think it was in the pit, but it was so quiet. The only people that could hear it were those around me who was close to me.
Yeah.
But Len, the last time I saw him, we were backstage on break at tea time doing one of the performances. He came back to say hello, and he brought it up. I wasn't gonna bring it up, but he brought it up. He says, "Yeah, you remember the time when?" And I start laughing because I knew what he was gonna bring up. I just think people now are more conscious of it. I see more people sitting there texting, more so than anything else.
Now that's audience, not musicians, right?
Yeah, that's audience.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, we gotta protect our musicians, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I just blew that protection.
Yeah. Speaking of conductors, I remember in Detroit, not quite the same thing, but the orchestra, I can't remember what we were playing, of course, but Yarvi was conducting, and Yarvi likes to play things a lot different. It's not going to be the same all 3 nights, right? Which is great because it keeps you on your toes. But for whatever reason, it's about 2 to 3 minutes in, the orchestra sounded okay, but not great. I mean, he just cuts the orchestra off and starts at the beginning again. And that's I haven't seen that ever before or since. Yeah. And but when he did that, everybody kind of just, okay, it's time to play now.
Yeah.
A little wake-up call.
Yeah. But he had the wherewithal to just said, you know what, this isn't good enough for us today, or something. I mean, it was great.
Yeah.
Because after that was just marvelous. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think of a concert I had at the Hollywood Bowl. And it's the Hollywood Bowl. It's outdoors, and it's Hollywood too. So there's a lot going on in the area. And Michael Tilson Thomas was conducting. I forget what piece, and there was a quiet passage, and helicopters started flying, and And he just slammed his baton down and just walked off stage.
Whoa.
So we sat, we're kind of like, okay, someone want to get up there and conduct.
That's right. That's
But
right.
eventually the helicopters, because it's a police helicopter looking for someone, obviously. It eventually went away and it didn't take a long time, maybe 5 minutes. So he comes back out, the audience applause. And just as, right before you play, there's always this quiet moment. Somebody yells out, "Turn it up." And he turns around and says, "We work all of our careers trying to perfect our pianissimo playing." And he turned around.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. I love it. Well, I had some friends that used to tell me their nightmare story was, being late to a performance or being late to performance, not a rehearsal. And I never used to have that nightmare dream over and over again, but a couple of colleagues I know have. But one time, this is in Houston, I'm late. I mean, I'm later than I normally am getting to the hall. And, I get to the backstage door. At least that time, I think I was dressed or something. I didn't have my tails in the locker or whatever. The A is being tuning. So your heart's going like, because, you're late and you just got to refocus or what. I can't remember if it was traffic or what, but that was one that's like, you never want to have that feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had that once, and I remember I just made it. Again, it was the bowl to play the national anthem. Literally, I walked out, and the guys had everything set up. But one of the older guys that had been in the orchestra for years, after we did the anthem, said to me, "It's a good thing. It's a good thing because now you're going to get here even earlier." Because when that doesn't happen, you don't think it can ever happen to you. But, going into the bowl, the traffic can be just unpredictable. And
I
it was
remember
that
that.
night. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did that concert was a Pavarotti concert. And of course, it was sold
Oh,
out. And I missed it by maybe 10, 15 minutes. Had I gotten there early, it'd have been
Right.
fine. But his point was, it's good. You barely made it. It'll never happen again. It never happened again.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Same. All
Yeah,
right.
that's what you need.
well, I had an experience of being late while I was there at the hall doing a performance.
You couldn't find the stage?
Well, no, what happened was, we always get the call from backstage. First, you get the 15-minute call, and then you get the 5-minute call, and then you get orchestra on stage. Now, how in the world I missed all three of those? Oh, no, actually, let me clear. I got the first one about 15 minutes. How I missed the other two, I have no idea. And I'm in the lounge, and it's unusually quiet in the lounge. I leave the lounge, and I'm walking backstage, and it's even more unusually quiet. And then as I get closer to the stage, because the way Benaroya Hall is built, the doors that lead to backstage, it seals off the rest of the hall pretty good because there's no noise that bleed in. So I open the door and I hear the music's going and walking out on, yeah.
Whoa.
And yeah,
Whoa.
I know. And then walking out on, and then when I went in, I said, "Joe, why didn't you give the call?" And he said, "Well, I did, and I couldn't stand there and argue with him. And also you have you have to accept the fact that if everybody else is on stage and you're not,
Right. Yeah.
that tells you where the problem is. So there was no point in me arguing. Why didn't you give the call?
Now, Mike, I've seen your timpani room up there in Seattle. Man, that's a nice room. You could have been just cozy in there, maybe. I know. That's a nice room.
Yeah,
Watch
you're
it.
right.
Watch it.
Come to think of it, that might have been the problem.
Well, say watching the Cardinals game, man. That's
Yeah.
what you were doing. Wasting your time too.
Yeah. Well, if they knew I was watching a Cardinal game and was late, I probably would have got fired. But that was a very humbling experience, But I walked out on stage, like my Denzel walk, no big deal, and walked up behind the drums and just picked up wherever the music was, And it was during a concert when conductor Maestro Schwartz, it was his son was cello soloist that particular concert. So, Jerry's cool. He didn't, it didn't bother him. He just act like nothing happened and I just sat back there embarrassed, trying to keep from sweating.
That's right.
To let everybody know you screwed up. I just walked out like, hey, I'm here, kind of thing. That was embarrassing. But when you've got tenure and you've got credibility, people say, well, he screwed up, so what, kind of thing. But that's not something you want to happen a second time. I don't care how good you are,
Yeah.
Or when you don't have tenure. Exactly right.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For those young people listening, exactly right.
No,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Well, they figured the timpanist must come on stage whenever he wants to.
they said, boy, that guy's special.
That's a good gig.
I do have nice conductors that every time we played the Messiah here, they let us, the trumpets and timpani, walk on. So we don't have to be at the first part. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah, I never had that pleasure. Also, some orchestras for Beethoven 9, the percussion doesn't come on till the singers come out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, not in LA. I don't know why. I mean, it's a fantastic piece to listen to,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
after performing it 700 times,
Yeah, exactly.
no.
I remember we did it once, Beethoven 9, and Carlos Calmar was conducting. And I found out later the guys had actually asked, or requested to be able to do that, but he wanted them to sit out there the whole time, which I don't know. I guess some conductors prefer that, but I just felt like, particularly the way the stage was configured, it wouldn't have been a big deal, for them. I mean, they could have walked on almost unseen, unnoticed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that goes, I guess.
When I was with a youth orchestra here in LA, we had a concert and we were doing one of the Brahms symphonies, and we had to stop because an audience member had a heart attack.
Oh,
And, they had to do resuscitation, all that. And they brought the gurney out and wheeled them out. And it took a long time for all that to happen. So we basically canceled the rest of the concert. And we found out at the next rehearsal the following week that the audience member had passed away. So that happened once in my career. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
that's some serious stuff.
yeah, that happened my first year in the orchestra. I think we were doing a Respighi piece where the timpani suddenly comes in with these double stops. It's a downbeat. And an audience member who was sitting in the front row, I think he was wearing a pacemaker, and he nodded off to sleep. And I hit those notes, and he just jolted up out of his sleep, and he had a heart attack. I didn't find this out until well after this happened. But the guy, he had a heart attack, and he passed away as well. And they kept
Wow.
that from me for a long time, and then they finally told me, later that because again, it was my first year in the orchestra, and that's something, no matter how indirect it was, it's just knowing that you, you did something that startled, I mean, you're doing your job, but still, and I
Yeah,
just,
I would deflect it off of you and put it on Respighi. He's the one that put in the sudden forte
yeah, yeah,
fortissimo.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
That's right.
yeah. On the opposite side, something lighter, but also conductor. I remember again in a youth orchestra here doing a concert and playing, and I forget the piece because it didn't really matter what it was. It was just very spirited, and the conductor lost his toupee.
Oh, that's some of that
Because
Benny Hill
right.
comedy, you know.
He was so animated that the toupee kind of slipped or slided and flew off, and the principal violist speared it with his bow and stuck it back up on the podium. That was a memorable occasion. I'll
Yeah,
never forget that.
you won't forget that one, right?
No, no.
Well, I have to say one of my most memorable occasions was we were playing what is the word, El Barada.
Del Grazioso.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and the solo downbeat for Timpani. When we got to that spot,
Yeah.
I played it in my mind. Just
I
switching
love it.
over the drum, and I went boom, but all I heard was that was the conductor. He
Wow.
did that, yeah. he did it. And then I'm like, what happened? And then I suddenly realized I did not play the downbeat, you know. And so we're standing there. I'm looking at him and he's looking at me, and I'm kind of wondering, thinking he's going to just go on, you know, but he keeps nodding and he nods. And then I finally play the downbeat. All right. Then we go on and continue. And he he later told me, thanked me, because he says we could not have gone on if I had not played that all together. So in other words, this is one of those better late than never. He was the conductor, wonderful conductor, very nice guy. Jesus
Lopez Cobos.
that's him. Yeah,
Yes.
Cincinnati.
Yeah. Oh,
He
yeah.
was Cincinnati. Yeah. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
we were backstage. You know, he's thanking me for it. You know, we're laughing about it, and so I mean, I'm feeling bad. I'm real apologetic, and you know, he was like, you know, if you do this stuff long enough, you know, Murphy's Law is going to come into play.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Somewhere at some point, you know, my students and some audience members, you know, they look at us and they think we never make a mistake, and you know, life is perfect on stage.
Right.
And I tell them, look, man, I can tell you some stories, you know. But see, when I was a student, I was the same way. When I went to a concert, you know,
Yeah.
I felt like I had to measure up to
Right.
my teachers because they never made a mistake.
Right.
Then when I got a job, I came to realize, you know,
You lowered the level, you certainly lowered that level there, Mike.
yeah, for sure.
But you know, when you mentioned Jesus Lopez de Cobos, I have to mention a story again back to the bowl. A lot of things happen at the bowl. So we're doing a concert and there's fireworks, and we rehearse it in the morning during the daylight, so the fireworks are not there. So yeah, that's one thing. But then when we perform it, the live fireworks happen, and including I don't know what it's called. I would call it something like a bottle rocket that they have on a cord that
Yeah,
goes from one side of the stage to the other. It flies across. You know,
yeah.
the audience loves it. They see this, you know, red flash going across. But Jesus had not seen that before. So he's conducting, and we probably doing 1812 or something like, and these rockets go shooting across. He's got a great sense of humor. You know what he did? He pulled out his white handkerchief and started waving it on
Wait a
his
minute.
baton. So I said, I give up. I give in.
Yeah,
I
that's
Very
surrender.
good. That's very good.
So this was apparently my initiation of sorts. This is my first year. We're doing a run out. I'm sitting there and I'm counting bars, counting measures, you know, waiting to play. And out the corner of my eye, I see this movement. And at first I ignored it, but it just stayed. It just kept happening. So I look down and my 23-inch ringer is sliding very slowly away from me.
What?
I love it. I love it. I
That
love
was
it.
my response. What in the world is going on? Well, my buddy Randy, you know, God rest his soul, Randy Boughton, he had attached, I call it a fishing line, but it was a rope or something. So I don't know where he got it from. And he starts pulling that drum away because it was a piece where the perk wasn't playing. I mean, he had it, and now I'm you know, it's the push and pull. I'm laughing and I'm kind of panicking at the same time because I needed that drum, you know. But he only pulled it away so far, just enough to let me, you know, to give me the business kind of thing.
That's great.
So the piece we continue, and then I reach over as a pro. I didn't move the drum back because that would have gave me away, right?
Right, right.
And then I was, so I had to make it part of the show. So I just leaned over and hit it whenever I had to, and I had to high five him after that. I mean,
That's great.
you know, that was really good.
Man, I have to say, just too much free time. Just too much
Yeah.
free time.
That's the story, man.
But
Yeah.
but that takes a lot of nerve to do that at a concert. I do it at a rehearsal, but at a concert, wow.
Yeah, they go. But I tell you,
Seattle's not in the union, so they have a whole other set of rules that they live by, obviously.
yeah. Well, you know, if there's a such thing as karma, it came back on Randy because one day it was a run out, and I'm sitting there counting bars, and it was a piece. It was just Randy and I. He's playing tambourine and some other accessories. So I'm sitting there, and again, I see movement out the corner of my eye, and I finally turn to look, and I look down, and it was Randy on the floor. We had these sound panels behind us, and there was a space between the bottom of the panels and the floor itself. Randy's crawling underneath there, trying to get back on stage because he had to sneak off stage because he forgot his tambourine.
Oh my God.
So he's
Wow.
so yeah, so you know, I'm looking back and he's there. He took his jacket off and he's trying to slide back under the panel to get back on stage, and he got stuck because of his stomach.
See? Yeah.
He's laying on the floor, and I look over, and then he looks up at me, like, you know, can you help? You know, so, yeah,
Help me, please.
Oh man.
I'm sitting there now. I'm trying to keep from laughing, and now the tears are coming down, right? And the music starts getting blurry.
Oh man.
Because, you know, it was just too much. And I told him after the concert, I said, you know, I really need to write a book, you know, because you know, I know it's only like my third year in the orchestra, but I see a lot of stuff coming on the horizon, and I probably should plan on writing a book. I mean, I tell you, I laughed so hard, I nearly lost it.
Wow, Randy, you reap what you sow, man.
Yeah, it came back to haunt him. Yeah. I couldn't have planned that better myself. Hit his tambourine, you know.
Just let it come. That's right. It'll come.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of time on hands that we have in the back in counting rest, I remember being in Spoleto, Italy, playing the festival. And Simile was Handel's Simile was programmed. And that was the first time, you know, to depict thunder on timpani with the roll.
Right.
And you play the overture, and then you play, I think, probably at the end. You got about 2.5 hours in between. I'm very, very lucky that, you know, the door out of the pit was right behind me, and it was, I checked with the conductor to make sure it was okay. Because I timed, you know, the dress rehearsal and to see how much time was there. And I don't condone this behavior, but especially for younger players. But at any rate, I was able to leave, and I would go eat dinner in town because it's a walking town. You're not driving anywhere, so you can just walk back to the hall and walk out to get dinner and whatever, and enjoy your time. Walk around a little bit, and my alarm went off in 15 minutes, enough to get back to the pit, come back in, and play the last part of the show. I loved it. Yeah, it was a great time. But again, only if you ask permission first. I would. That's how I would preface that.
Well, I didn't think to ask permission on this particular opera we played. I can't remember the name of it, but I had a lot of, between the end of the first act and then the last act, the next to last act into the last act. I had all this time, so much time that I didn't plan on eating dinner before I left the house because I figured I have. And that was our favorite Thai restaurant was across from the hall.
Yeah.
So I had the timing down at rehearsal. So it came down to the performance, you know, and the time always seemed a little bit longer during the performance than at the rehearsal. So I knew I had plenty of time. So once I was done playing at the end of the first act, lay the sticks down, walk out the pit. I'm leaving the hall to go to my favorite restaurant, and I always got a carry out and ate back at the in the lounge. So I'm walking out, and I walk backstage. This is opera. And as I walk backstage, there's Spate Jenkins, the executive director of the opera, backstage. And he sees me walking out, leaving the hall. And he says, "Mike, are you playing this opera?" I said, "Yes, sir." I am. And then he said, "Well, are you okay? You're not feeling?" I said, "Well, no. I thought since I had so much time, I'd go and grab me some dinner." He said, "Oh, you going to the Thai restaurant?" I said, "Yeah." He said, bring me back a saute."
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love it. See, they do things different in Seattle.
You know? But I mean, he was cool. You know, I mean, we were like friends, but still, it felt funny. I'm leaving, and there's the executive director watching me leave doing the performance. And then I have to fess up where I'm going. And he says, all right, well, bring me back.
That's good. I like that. I like that.
I don't have anything like that.
Seattle's the place to be, man. You want?
Yeah, I no comment. That's all.
Yeah.
I can remember Philharmonic doing a tour to Mexico City, and prior to the tour, administration asking me, "Are there any instruments that we can just, use there and rent and not have to take?" And they never asked me this before that. And for some reason, they were asking about this time, and I've always, we always take Philharmonic equipment, but this time I said, okay, yeah, okay. We're doing, as we always do, percussion heavy programs. So, I told administration that, we'll bring our small things, our tambourines, triangles, snare drums, etc. And okay, I'll give you, a list of the larger things. So we go down, and as always, I go to the hall early to see how things are, how the setup, what the instruments are. And I had asked for a set of 4 tom-toms as a part of what we're going to use. And they had a set of 4 tam-tams to use. So, make the story short, the Philharmonic never asked me if we could rent after that. So
That's right.
yeah, I proved my points.
Well, the last time when I'm still with the orchestra, our last trip to Carnegie Hall, we were at the airport in Seattle before we were due to board, and we got delayed. Well, it turns out that there was a problem with the timpani, and I said, "Well, what's the problem?" And there was a weight issue, with the amount of stuff that was being. And
What did you put in there now, Mike?
I'm like, yeah, right. Or what did Randy put in there? You just never know.
Right.
It created a real concern. I mean, it wasn't just about Timpani, but they just added to what the concern was. And then the next thing I know is I'm told, well, we're going to have to leave the Timpani here and not take them on tour. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to play? And so they just said that they were going to look into Timpani there in New York. Well, fortunately, I'm trying to think of, there was a guy who was very popular with renting timpani. Aaron, I think it was.
Ayers?
Yeah, Bob Ayers. That's it. Yeah, who's no longer with us, I understand.
Right.
But
Yeah.
they provided a nice set of lights that were very nice. We would use it we were premiering this piece called Become Ocean. That in fact, it got so popular, Taylor Swift, she heard it and donated like 50 grand to the orchestra.
Wow.
But the drums were really nice. I got really lucky, but I never heard of an orchestra going on tour and then suddenly finding out that they can't transport the instruments that they need, because of a weight problem on the plane,
But at least it was New York. You have a little bit more means.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm glad it's something that the airport, was conscious of, that they caught it.
Well, you'd think that that's something the production manager or whoever in administration would have taken care of, because it's not the first time you guys have toured,
Exactly. That was like our second or third trip to Carnegie. Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of stories like that, but I'll leave that for another time. But hearing you talk about Seattle in your hall, I remember the time that was our first stop on our tour, which meant our equipment had to go up by truck from LA to Seattle, which we've done before. Is not a big deal. But the administration didn't quite allow enough time. So when we got there and we checked in our hotel and did all that, then went to the hall to rehearse, there's typically what they call an acoustic rehearsal before the concert.
Right. Yep. Sound check.
The instruments weren't there. So we're just sitting around waiting, because they had made the time from LA to Seattle by truck a little bit too tight. And apparently on the way there was weather and this and that. And so, musicians were fine. We didn't have to rehearse, but the conductor was pissed,
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, that's I could see that. I mean, because they had to go through some steep mountain passes too between LA and and that factored in time.
Yeah.
Or should have been factored in.
Yeah, given the weather too, but they always cut it close. But it's like us talking about coming to a concert and being late. I think after that they made sure they had a
That's right. All it takes is one. All
Yeah.
it takes is one.
It's
Yeah.
that old saying, experience can be the best teacher, you know.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But then getting back to production and production manager, I mean, I can give you several stories. I'll just give you one. We were doing a soundtrack, movie soundtrack. I was playing timpani. There's no percussion. So all I needed was the timpani and my trunk. My trunk had my mallets in it.
Mhm.
So I get there, an hour ahead, whatever, to set up, to tune up, whatever. I'm like, where's my trunk? Where's my timpani are there, and I can do what I need to do with them, but I have no mallets. And the production manager comes over, is everything okay? I'm like, no, where's my trunk? He's like, oh, I'll be right back. And he goes, makes phone calls, whatever. It's still at the hall.
Oh, wow.
So they got it over eventually, but they had to record two cues that didn't include timpani
Right.
initially.
Yeah.
So, but I can give you a lot of stories about that type of thing, instruments not showing up. Actually, I'll give you one more, and it's the opposite. And we did a European tour. And again, I'll always say the LA Phil does a lot of contemporary music, and we were doing a lot on this tour. But anyway, we get to the first city, whatever, and I'm backstage as usual ahead of time, setting up and looking, and I see our 5 octave marimba, which 5 octave marimba is big. You guys know that, and the trunk it goes to is even huge.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Why is this here? So I go to the production manager and I ask him. He says, "Yeah, I know it wasn't on the list, but I just wanted to make sure that it was here just in case." I was like, "You got to be kidding! Mike? Can you imagine how much it costs to ship that by
Yeah.
plane to
Yeah.
Europe and
Yeah.
back to
That, yeah.
LA?"
And you
Yeah.
didn't use it.
And you
Didn't
didn't
no,
need
it
it.
didn't need it. It wasn't on my list. I mean,
Wow.
I would have thanked him profusely if we needed it, and I didn't put it on the list. But it's the opposite. It's something we didn't need, and it wasn't a triangle. It was a 5 octave marimba.
Yeah.
You know?
Remember some of those stories you told me about, that finally led to a conference with Esapeka.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Go on, Douglas.
No, we just experienced that in DC. We get to the rehearsal
Yeah.
and the percussion instruments aren't there, so we just twiddling our thumbs, and it's amazing.
Well, it's
They
it's
have the list.
percussion. It's percussion. It's drums. It's no big deal, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
As long as the piano soloist, the soloist has their piano, the conductor's podium is there.
yeah.
And I'll just throw this in. And Mitch told me this story. Mitch Peters, my teacher, if anyone listening doesn't know, he told me this story years ago when he was in the orchestra that he walked up to Zubin to ask some musical question about what was being played. Zubin was in conversation with the stage manager setting up the orchestra, a new hall we hadn't played in. And he was telling them violins here, yeah, make room for the seconds here, etc. So then the stage manager said, where do you want the percussion? And Zubin said, put them anywhere. It doesn't matter.
Oh, Rubens.
So there is some representation of what we can expect. It's just one time, but I think you guys would say that, yeah, we're not high up on the list typically. Sometimes,
Unfortunately,
yes. Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah.
Well, what used to really bug me was, I mean, it usually happened on runouts is you show up and then there's really not enough room on stage. You have to either end up setting your drums up in an awkward way, or leaving the drum off. But I hated that.
Mike, I have to say, wife and I, Adrian and I, we went to Vienna for our anniversary earlier this year, and she kind of dragged me to see Salome. I mean, it was great, Vienna Opera doing Salome. And by the way, a box over was Placido. Placido was sitting in the next box right over. So we
Oh,
we greeted each other and blah blah
uh-huh.
blah. But anyway, talking about the setup, oh my gosh, literally, I'm not jiving you. Half of the percussion section was in the hall, as in the hall that leads out, not the pit, but the hall that leads to the pit. I
Wow.
couldn't see the percussion, and when they played, it sounded like they were in a different space.
Wow.
It's like this is the Vienna Opera. Maybe that's the way they do Salome, because that's their thing.
Wow.
I was amazed.
That's wow.
So it's universal. It's
Yes.
worldwide.
Don't
Put the
feel bad.
percussion
That's right.
wherever, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, it kind of helps to know you're not the only one, with some of the stuff you
You're
go
not in
That's
it
through.
true.
alone. That's right.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. But that's what I think we need to educate. We need to stand up for what we do because nobody else is going to do it.
That's the most important thing. When these things first start to happen, of course, we get upset but we talk amongst ourselves. And the most important thing we can do, and then share it, even in this podcast, is share it with our younger generation to go in and educate. You can get pissed off about it, but that's not going to fix anything. So just
That's true. Yeah.
what we need. Yeah. It's huge.
Yes, it's more important to educate than to vent.
Yeah. Well, I say do both.
Okay.
Do both.
Don't bottle it up.
That's something to be said for that, for sure, right now.
No. Yeah. Don't take it out on your drums, man.
Right.
I was just going to say, those that don't know, we have a former timpanist here of the Seattle Symphony, Michael Crusoe, people's timpanist, former timpanist, New Mexico Philharmonic, Douglas Cardwell. Have you guys ever played in a situation outside of your home, as in your home hall, where the humidity was either really high or it was very arid, very dry, that it was just the opposite of what you expected?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, where I live now, when I was with the orchestra, we toured here. I had calf heads. I was touring with my calf. And one of the works on the program was the Barber Violin Concerto, which in the first movement have low E's below the staff. So my 31 with the pedal halfway level was at an E flat, a high E flat.
You're 31?
Yeah, on my 31.
Yes.
With the pedal level was at a high E flat. And I thought, you should have seen me start pumping the water because I was concerned the head was going to split.
Yeah.
It was going to just split on me. And I barely got it down to an F. And then I turned the crank, when it came time to play the E. And as I'm playing along, playing those low E naturals, the pitch just kept creeping up. All right. So now I'm playing this involuntary chromatic passage. It's going up, and we go along. And finally, when I hit the last, what was supposed to be the E, I saw Jerry kind of look up. And then he looked away. It was like a fleeting moment. He said, did I hear something? Then he kept going. But that was scary. That was really scary. And the thing is, being ambitious and all, I put on brand new heads, and I learned later, I was talking with Don Liuzzi, who, he uses calf all the time. Mm-hmm. And Don's suggestion was that if I ever did it again, he always travels with heads that have been worn, that have some wear and tear on them, and have been stretched out, because then they don't respond as, as radically as they go. So, so from then on, whenever I toured with calf, if I had new calf on, I would take those off, and those heads that I set aside with all the stretch marks on them, I would put that on, those on. Yeah. As a matter of fact, too, I saw, I forget what orchestra it was from, and I went up, to greet the timpanist, and his calf, his heads were so stretched, they were almost all white. You didn't just have a stretch marks in a section of it. And when I looked at them, I thought, well, I wonder how this is going to, they must sound really false. But they didn't. Out in the hall, it sounded just fine,
Yeah.
And I didn't see him fighting with the sponges and stuff like I've typically had to do. And, and answer to your question, that was my experience.
Yeah, I would have taken the lazy way out, and I've just played an octave higher, man. Upper E's, man.
There you go.
This is this is what God has given me today.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I was never really a fan of traveling with calf anyway, but I just wanted that challenge going into a different environment. I just didn't think I'd run into anything that extreme. Vegas was really dry.
Right. Yeah.
Our average here in the desert, there's also arid desert there in Vegas. In Albuquerque, we're 5,000 feet above sea level. And literally, if I look over my humidity gauge now, it probably reads 16% humidity.
Oh, wow.
And that's not an exaggeration. Yeah. So.
That's pretty dry. Yeah.
And I've seen it as low as 8 before. I think it's a joke, but it's not. This is you're reading it. Yeah. So when we get up to 32% humidity, it's double. It's like, ooh.
Feels good.
Yeah.
Get out the calf now,
That's
man. Like,
right.
wow.
Yeah, right.
Do your recordings now.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Now I was gonna say that was one of the big challenge for me in Seattle itself, because it rains a lot.
Yeah.
And in the hall, like backstage versus on stage is pretty different, And so what would happen is I can have high humidity with the doors of the hall open, but then when they close them for the start at the start of the performance and turn the lights up, everything just changes. Yeah, it was constantly, the seesaw up and down. I mean, I eventually just started during the winter months, setting the heads for when it was really dry, even backstage where it wasn't so dry, I would prepare the drums as though it was really dry so that when I did get out on stage and they did close the doors and turn up the lights, I'd be ready for it. The changes weren't as drastic.
Right.
And then it was the opposite when springtime and summer came around. It wasn't as much of a problem, but it was a real challenge using calf in Seattle. It really was.
You guys ever have any unusual requests from conductors that you can share with us?
I have one. I was playing Beethoven, and I already had my mallets that I used to make out of Purple Heart, and they're egg shaped. And I'm using these mallets, and they're wood, and playing. And out in the hall, I mean, you can make them sound more, of course, more articulate and more. I don't want to use that word, but he actually asked, "Do you have do you have harder mallets?"
Yeah.
And I just holds them up to him, and I don't, unless you want metal, and I didn't say that, but of course you change your playing, and then he wanted to articulate a different type of sound, but they just asked for something harder, and you're already using wood, It's,
Right.
Yeah, that's about it. I think the most unusual thing for me was I was asked to use snare drum sticks on timpani.
Right.
It started out as, do you have wood sticks? And I used those. My initial approach was I have a pair of classic Vic Firth wood mallets where the ball is really big, Well, I guess that sound was too big for him, So he asked for snare drum sticks, which that really went against the grain. But, it's a conductor. What are you going to do?
Right.
I mean, I could have, I could have challenged him on it and said, well, look, I don't think that's very musical. We don't do that here, anything, And then 4 years down the road, the guy becomes music director of the Seattle
There
Symphony.
you go. Yes.
And there you
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. About those mallets now.
Yeah, right.
You're a fine player, but
But
you know,
it didn't surprise me. He was a German conductor, very, very Germanian, in his approach to things. So,
Yeah.
I just went with it. To me, that's just part of being a musician. You got to be flexible.
Just adapt. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of a story. We were doing maybe Mahler 7, Mahler 6, I forget, whichever one has a little glockenspiel in it. And we're doing it with Michael Tilson Thomas. And he stopped and said, or asked the percussion, can you use brass mallets? I like that brass mallet sound. And I spoke up and said, well, we don't like to do that here. I didn't go into the whole thing as it can pit your instrument and blah, blah, blah. But basically what I did, because, like we've made the point, you have to please the conductor. I got our old set of Glock out for the next rehearsal, and we used some of those aluminum mallets. So it's almost the same sound, and it was on, like I say, not our great glockenspiel Parsifal bells, but on an older set we had. But, the point being, conductor made a request. They have a particular sound in their head, in their ears, and they want to hear that. And, there's a fine line for me. I'm like, well, this is what we do. This is our sound. But they want to kind of change it when you
Right.
can, when we allow them to more of what their sound is. So, not a big deal, but.
On another education kick, I've had some guest conductors ask for, they ask for a harder mallet or whatever. And you're not confronting them. I won't switch. I'll just ask, what articulation do you want? Because they don't ask anyone else to change their embouchure, or they don't ask anyone else to change their bow. It's always about the sound that they want to hear instead of or hard or whatever. And I've taken a couple aside. You don't want to do it in public, but you go to the room, knock on the door, and just say, just educate them about, just ask us like a regular musician, the sound that you want.
Wait a minute. That's getting out there now.
And this is education because this is from the back, right? This is tales from the back. And you educate them and they look at you like, I've never thought of that before. And because they want to seem like, I think they want to know something about percussion, but you know about music, and that's okay. You don't need to know about percussion.
Yeah. But, I think the key there is that you went to the room. They don't want to be be found out that perhaps they don't have the same knowledge about percussion in front of the whole orchestra.
Right. And they don't need to. So yeah, that was, I find that to be, and that's, I got that information. I started doing that. I got that from my teacher, Sal Rabio. And it's just so elegant. It just make it about the music. Yeah. And you don't need to call them out on the podium, but you need to have a little talk with them just so they going forward, just ask about the music,
Well, I think they need to know this. They should know this because it's going to save them time in rehearsal. Instead of stopping and having this dialogue, it can be communicated in other ways. And they always want to have as much rehearsal time as possible. I always say that when a conductor never says anything to me or my section, I'm happy because they're probably happy. They have so much other stuff to deal with. They don't want to have to stop and say, wood stick, whatever.
Yeah.
Another incident I had with Michael, it's not an incident, but I was in a youth orchestra at the time, but he was conducting the Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique, last movement, near the very end where all the strings go to Colegno. They're playing with the back, that very eerie sound.
Yeah, with the ruta.
He stopped and he looked back at the percussion and he's like, why don't you guys play that too on wood blocks and tempo? I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
So, he's the boss. So we did. We didn't end up doing it, but it was a nice idea because he wanted more sound because the string players, they don't practice getting all that,
Yeah.
In Detroit, we used to play. Yarvi wanted a ruta on the shell.
Oh, really?
And it worked great. And
so
that worked great.
Michael's not the only one that has asked for that. I thought that's the only time I'd ever heard about that.
Yeah, I was surprised in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was like, I don't know, 40 years ago or something,
Yeah.
Well, I one of the things that whenever I've had like deep conversations with my students, and it usually came about as they would ask questions, and your thoughts, about how you go about your job. And one of the things that I used to share with students, my philosophy is that there's a certain psychology that comes with being a principal timpanist, because sometimes, a conductor will ask you to do something, not because it's something that they want you to do, but sometimes they're searching for answers themselves, and they will ask you to do something to see what your response is going to be. And then they react from there. So, that was just something I always kept in mind. And also, I could always get a sense, too, that with some conductors, they ask you to do something based on what they heard someone else do.
Right.
And again, it may not necessarily be what they want. It's in some cases, it's like that's all they know. So they're asking you, to do it. And then if you have a different idea, and there were times when I would say, well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, not in front of the orchestra, but then I would just share a thought with them, and there were occasions when they say, oh, well, let's try that, and see, that tells me again that, they're searching, they ask you to do something, but deep down they're searching to see what.
They don't have that sound in their head yet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So.
Yeah, when you started with this, Michael, I thought you were going in a different direction, as in they're just messing with you. That's a possibility too.
Yeah, you get that too. Yeah, you do. It's I call that the dog in the fire hydrant.
Wait a minute. Are we the dog or are we the fire hydrant?
Yeah, with the fire hydrant, you know. I mean,
Can we
they cheat, you know.
can we switch that around, please?
Yeah, we should.
Please, please.
You know, they feel like they got to mark their territory, so to speak. You know, and
Yeah,
that's
I had an incident with a German conductor I will not name. I was playing timpani. We are doing a Brahms, whatever, and he stopped and said, blah, 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 mallets. So I picked up another pair, played solo. Nah, maybe that. Picked up another pair, played solo. Nah. Picked up another pair. Then I picked up the original pair, played.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the sound.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, I,
Yeah.
it didn't really hit me at the time, but I'm like, okay, he's probably messing with me.
And God forbid you got one pair that they like that's color a green or blue.
Yeah.
Right. Where's the blue? I want the blue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've observed that when it comes to certain timpani too. You know, they want period instruments. You know, and then so you just put a pair of timpani out there that don't have pedals. You know, they just got hand crank. Like it could be a chain drum, same size as the pedal drums you were using.
Yeah.
But visually, you know, they think, okay, there we go.
That's it.
Yeah, that's happened before.
Yeah, Mike, I look at that in a completely different way. That's my opportunity to go up to management and say, this conductor asked for period instruments. He asked me, why don't we have them? We need here's what we need to buy. That's when they usually, okay. Yeah,
yeah, right. Now it's valid, right?
Yeah. And other interesting conductor requests that I've had, conductors just stopped and said, do you have shinier cymbals? I'm like, what do you mean? Do you want a brighter? No, do you have shinier cymbals? I'm like,
hey, it's a presentation. Come on now.
I guess I didn't get the memo, It's about how you look and as opposed to how you sound. He'd rather have cymbals that are shiny but sound like trash.
You need flash.
As opposed to use cymbals, which, since marching band, I have never polished my cymbals since high school. We used to polish them every week for the football game and for the parades, but that's it. So, it just goes, you just got to do what they say,
It's amazing.
Try to please them. Have you ever had any requests on any contemporary piece to hit the bowls of your timpani?
I have. And typically when I do that, if I know I have to do it, I don't use the primary set.
Yeah, I haven't had that, but again, my teacher Mitch told me of times where, and I don't think he would say it to the conductor, but he'd say, "Yeah, you provide the timpani, I'll play fortissimo on the bowls, but not on our drums."
Also, I had a couple of friends that they play a piece that they had old bowls sent to them, and they would play and had the setup that way, which makes a lot of sense too. Yeah, I mean, there are older bowls or used bowls that were out around or something.
Right.
So you would use that. And I think that's very clever, and I like that idea.
That's just a lot of work for just a sound, I mean, I'd try some old timbales that are brass and I don't know, but composers, that's another podcast, requests from composers. Now that gets difficult, and my number one complaint is when you have to play glockenspiel, tom-tom, snare drum, and bass drum, but you have one pair of sticks.
One set of mallets. You need to come up with a new design.
Right to mallets, and that works on your computer. It does not work in real life. I mean, I can do it, but snare drum sticks on a glockenspiel is not what you think it's going to be.
Well, here's your opportunity. We have to design a half mallet with the brass.
Not me. That ain't my gig.
I'm done.
We leave that to some other guys. Yeah. So, well, guys, it's been a pleasure. I think we probably have to do a part 2 with your agreement, but I appreciate your time very much. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for all you guys do for ABOP. Very much appreciated.
No, thank you. Yeah, and it's fun to get some of this stuff off your chest.
It's a little bit late now that we're not with our orchestra. Well, better late than never. So
you're still not alone. Still not alone.
Fantastic. All right, thank you guys.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much, Raynor. Take care. See you, Mike.
All right, Doug. Take care.
That concludes this episode, Tales from the Orchestra's Rear. I hope you enjoyed listening to our stories. A special thank you to our supporters and sponsors of ABOP's mentorship program. Our corporate sponsors include Black Swamp Percussion, Cooperman, Freer Percussion, Innovative Percussion, InSound Mallets, Majestic Percussion, Marimba One, Malatech, Remo, Sabian, Vic Firth, and Zildjian. ABOP is a nonprofit. Your donations are tax deductible. Check out our website, www.abop.us, for information on how you can contribute. Please follow our podcast and spread the word about ABOP. We greatly appreciate your support. We are the Alliance of Black Orchestral Percussionists. ABOP, thank you for listening.